All right, this right here is crazy. It's definitely crazy. We got to get into this. So this is an article that is basically giving us the rundown on why the owners are kind of refusing to sign off on some of the things that the WNBA players want. It points out viewpoints like them viewing it as an unstable business up to this point.
Well, that single reaction you just saw, it tells you absolutely everything you need to know about where this incredibly tense negotiation currently stands. You see, the WNBA Players Association officially opted out of their collective bargaining agreement way back in October 2024, and now we are all staring right down the barrel of a potential and, frankly, disastrous lockout. But here's the crucial piece of the puzzle that has been completely missing from almost all the coverage you've seen. We're going to look at the owner's actual perspective. I'm not talking about speculation, and I'm definitely not talking about more anonymous sources. We're talking about the real, hard-nosed business reasons why they are refusing to budge on the issue of revenue sharing. And trust me, when you see the numbers they're looking at and the risks they're weighing, this entire standoff starts to make a whole lot more sense from their side of the table.
WNBA players have quickly become some of the most recognizable female athletes in the world, with ballooning ticket sales and record-breaking viewership over the past 2 seasons. As a result, league revenues have soared. But unlike their male counterparts in the National Basketball Association, who are guaranteed 50% of the NBA's basketball-related income, WNBA players are not guaranteed a percentage of such income, which includes things like media deals, merchandise, ticket sales, concessions, so the players haven't shared in the league's flood of rude.
Let's establish the baseline here, because the numbers are pretty stark right now. WNBA players receive a shockingly low 7% of league revenue. Let me say that again, just 7. Meanwhile, their counterparts in the NBA are guaranteed a full 50% of all basketball-related income. That enormous gap is precisely what the players are fighting to close. But this is exactly where the entire situation gets incredibly complicated. You've had multiple major media outlets report on these negotiations by simply repeating the line that the league isn't profitable, but they do it without ever providing a shred of actual financial documentation to back that claim up. For example, NBC Sports claimed the WNBA has a long reputation of being an unstable business. Bleacher Report wrote, "The league isn't profitable yet." Sports Illustrated made nearly identical statements, and the common thread, none of them cited any verifiable sources. The Athletic then took it even further, quoting their own anonymous sources who claimed the league and its teams combined haven't been profitable since the WNBA's inception. That's 29 straight years of reported losses, a staggering figure if it's actually true.
And the league has been careening toward a lockout as negotiations soured, with revenue sharing being the largest sticking point. Despite the massive amount of money coming into the WNBA, the league, which is majority owned by NBA owners, wants to keep their revenue sharing structure the same, guaranteeing far more profit for owners and investors than for the players who actually play the game. And too many news reports have catered to owners' interests when reporting on the negotiations between the players.
Now here is the one article that everyone, and I mean everyone, keeps referencing. In October 2024, just before the CBA opt-out deadline, the New York Post published a bombshell piece claiming the WNBA would lose a staggering $40 million that season alone. And their source for this massive number, a single anonymous NBA executive who was quoted as saying, "The WNBA owes the NBA so much we won't see any windfall for years." That one article, based on one anonymous quote, has become the entire foundation for the unprofitable league narrative that is completely dominating these high-stakes negotiations. But you have to notice the timing here. This story conveniently drops right before the deadline for the players to opt out of the CBA, which is the absolute prime time for both sides to try and control the public narrative. And even more telling, it's coming from an anonymous NBA executive who has a clear, invested financial interest in keeping player costs as low as humanly possible.
Negotiations is profitability. Now, we've heard over and over and over again how much money these owners lose every year. Oh, we finished in the red, we're in the red, we're in the red, we're in the red. Even with the soar of Caitlin Clark, they claim to have finished in the red. They had to get everybody private jets because everybody was tripping that Caitlin Clark had them. Everybody, so that's another $50 million spent on PJs for everybody. And that was that.
Okay, let's keep digging, because here's what makes this whole narrative particularly frustrating and frankly insulting for the players. The WNBA just wrapped up its most successful, most watched, most talked about season in its entire history. The arrival of Caitlin Clark as a rookie drove absolutely record-breaking viewership numbers and unprecedented ticket sales across the league. On top of that, you have multiple expansion teams who are paying a jaw-dropping $250 million each just for the privilege of joining this supposedly unprofitable league. Think about that. You've got ownership groups in Portland, Toronto, and San Francisco all writing massive $250 million checks to get a piece of the action. So you have to ask the incredibly obvious question here. Why on earth are billionaires lining up to invest $250 million into a business that reportedly loses $40 million annually? That math just doesn't add up. Something is off. Either these incredibly successful investors are suddenly terrible at business, or the financial picture is significantly more complicated than the simple headline. The league loses money every
Everybody's
year.
jumping to throw in $250 million to get their team and all of this stuff. But hey, and then it shows here WNBA will lose $40 million this season and its NBA investors are growing impatient. That was an article in the New York Post. And it says when numbers regarding the league's profitability are cited in coverage of the current negotiations, the source is usually an article from the New York Post. Shortly before the deadline to opt out of the CBA in October 2024, prime time for each side try to control the narrative. The Post Josh Cosman and Brian Lewis reported the WNBA will be losing 40.
And this is the now. Let's talk about a critical factor that the team owners are absolutely considering in these negotiations, and it's a number that frankly terrified them. When Caitlin Clark got injured during the 2024 season, the league's viewership dropped by 55%. Let that sink in. More than half of the entire television audience simply vanished the moment she couldn't play. That isn't just some gradual decline. That is a catastrophic, instantaneous drop that is tied directly to the availability of a single player. So, I want you to put yourself in an owner's position for just a moment. The players are at the table asking you to commit to a brand new revenue-sharing model that guarantees them a huge percentage of all income, but you just witnessed your league's viewership get cut in half, literally in half, because your biggest star got hurt. What happens if she suffers a more serious injury next season? What happens if she's out for an extended period of time? You would be locked into paying out a percentage of revenue that might completely evaporate overnight, based entirely on the health of one person. From their perspective, that is not a stable foundation for a 50-50 revenue split. It's a massive, terrifying risk that NBA owners simply don't face because their league's popularity is distributed across dozens of superstars and deeply established multi-generational franchises.
Also, remember the owners watched 55% of the viewership drop when Caitlin Clark got hurt. 55% of the viewership tanked when Caitlin Clark was injured. Got to take that into consideration. I'm sure the owners are taking that into consideration. Like, hey, what if something happened and this girl gets hurt again? We lose more than half of the viewership again? I'm sure that.
All right, so with all that risk in mind, let's talk about what the league is actually offering the players. Because this is the part of the story where the owners genuinely believe they're being generous. The WNBA has put a proposal on the table to triple player salaries while still maintaining a conditional revenue-sharing arrangement. On the surface, that sounds pretty great, right? Who wouldn't want to triple their money? But as always, here's the catch. That revenue sharing only kicks in if certain, very specific growth targets are reached. And here's the kicker. According to the league's own admission, those benchmarks have never once been hit in the history of the league. Now, part of that is because the 2020 COVID shutdown made the targets completely impossible to achieve. But even in the years without a global pandemic, the league consistently structured these benchmarks in a way that made them extremely difficult, if not impossible, to reach. And here's the final nail in the coffin. Even if, by some miracle, the targets are met, the players only get to share in the revenue on the overage. That is, only the amount of money above the benchmark. And even then, they only receive a tiny fraction of that overage. So, when the league goes to the public and says revenue sharing is part of our offer, they are technically telling the truth, but it's a version of revenue sharing that has been specifically designed to rarely, if ever, actually pay out a single dollar to the player.
Yada yada yada. But this is them questioning the owner's stance and why they have not been transparent with documentation for the WNBPA showing the losses and all of that stuff. But it's also showing their viewpoint on why they are hesitant to commit to whatever this revenue sharing thing is. Like, the players getting 50% of the revenue sharing is not going to happen. You can forget about that. They can forget about that. That's not going to happen.
This is precisely where the players' skepticism becomes not only understandable, but completely justified. As the original article astutely points out, reporters covering this story need to read these proposals much more carefully and critically. You see, there is a massive, fundamental difference between clean sharing, where players get a straightforward, agreed-upon percentage of all revenue, just like the NBA players do, and a ridiculously complicated formula that allows the league to claim they're offering revenue sharing, when in reality, the actual payout is designed to be minimal to non-existent. The owners are banking on the fact that most fans and media members won't bother to read the fine print. They can go out and tell the public, we offered to triple salaries and include revenue sharing, which, to the average person, sounds incredibly generous. But when you actually dig into the structure of that deal, you realize that the revenue sharing component might never materialize. And those tripled salaries, they still leave the players earning only about 7 to 10% of total league revenue, which is a world away from the 50% their male counterparts rightfully receive.
It says when the league says revenue sharing is part of its offer to the players in current negotiations, reporters ought to read that with skepticism. Does it mean players get a share of all revenue, sometimes referred as a clean sharing like the men, or does it mean there's a complicated formula that allows the league to say they're sharing when in fact the women will get peanuts? So, listen, man, this lockout, I mean, we're getting all viewpoints, and this is just kind of showing kind of where the owners stand in all of this and why they are not looking to give the players what they want. Get down.
So here is where we ultimately land on this entire, incredibly complex negotiation. The owners are looking at what they consider to be a fundamentally unstable business model. They are seeing viewership numbers that are dangerously dependent on just one or two star players. They are constantly pointing to decades of reported financial losses, even if those reports conveniently lack any transparent financial documentation to prove them. At the same time, they're watching these expansion teams pay massive 9-figure fees, which strongly suggests the league has significant underlying value. But they're also dealing with the hard reality that the NBA has been subsidizing the WNBA's operations for years. From their cold, calculated perspective, committing to a 50-50 revenue split right now would be nothing short of financial suicide. They truly believe they need more time to see if this recent explosion in growth is actually sustainable, or if it's just a temporary Caitlin Clark-driven spike that could disappear just as quickly as it arrived. So, they're offering what they see as a reasonable compromise, significantly higher salaries for the players, with the potential for revenue sharing down the road if the league proves it can maintain this new growth trajectory without collapsing the moment a star player gets injured. But here is the giant, glaring hole in the owner's calculation. The players are the product. Without them, there is no league, there is no viewership, there are no expansion fees, and there are no media deals. The NBA didn't become a global powerhouse by underpaying its stars and waiting to see if the league would succeed. They did the opposite. They invested heavily in the players. They marketed them aggressively as superstars, and they built a revenue model that incentivized everyone, from the owners to the last guy on the bench, to grow the business together. The WNBA owners want the players to first prove the league is stable before they commit to FAI. Possibly prove anything when they're being paid just 7% of the revenue and can't even afford to play year-round in the US without going overseas in the off-season. It is a classic chicken and egg problem, and somebody has to be the one to break the cycle. The owners keep pointing to financial losses, but they steadfastly refuse to open their books to prove it. They keep citing that $40 million loss figure from the New York Post, but again, that's based on a single anonymous source with an obvious agenda. Meanwhile, brand new teams are paying $250 million just to join, which suggests the league's true valuation is significantly higher than the "we're losing money every year" narrative would have you believe. And that 55% viewership drop when Caitlin Clark got injured, you could argue that's actually an argument for paying players more, not less. If your entire business model is that fragile, you desperately need to invest heavily in developing multiple stars, building deeper fan connections around more teams, and creating a product that isn't totally dependent on one player's help. You certainly don't achieve that by offering a conditional revenue-sharing plan that is designed to never pay out. The players opted out of the CBA because they recognize that this very moment is their point of maximum leverage. The league just had its most successful season ever. Public interest is at an all-time high, expansion is happening, and new media deals are on the horizon. If they can't get a fair deal now, then when exactly will the timing ever be better? The owners are betting that the players will blink first and eventually accept the tripled salaries without a real revenue share. The players are betting that the owners simply cannot afford a lockout that would kill all of this incredible momentum. Somebody's going to be right, and somebody's going to be very, very wrong. But what has become crystal clear is that this negotiation isn't really about whether the league is profitable right now. It's about who gets to benefit when it inevitably becomes massively profitable in the near future. The owners want to keep all of that future upside for themselves until they are absolutely certain the growth is permanent. The players, on the other hand, want to share in that upside now because they are the ones on the court actually creating the value that is driving all of this growth. So, when you see the headlines about the WNBA potentially facing a lockout, I want you to understand what's really happening behind the scenes. This is not about greedy players demanding money that the league doesn't have. This is about a group of owners who have watched their league's values skyrocket and are now refusing to share that new value with the very players who made it all possible. They are hiding behind claims of unprofitability that they refuse to substantiate with actual financial records, while simultaneously charging new owners $250 million just to join the party. The real question isn't whether the WNBA can afford to pay its players fairly. The question is whether the owners are willing to do it before they are forced to, and based on how these negotiations are going, it looks like we are all about to find out the hard way. So, drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you think the owners are justified in being cautious, or are they just trying to maximize their profits while the players do all the heavy lifting? And more importantly, what do you think happens if we actually get a lockout? Can the league even survive killing its own momentum right when things are finally taking off? Let me know what you think, and make sure you subscribe, because this story is far from over.